Welcome to Omni Sport, the ultimate African sports audio channel. Live and on demand at omniaudio.africa and streaming data free on the MTN network in South Africa. It's where Africa comes to play.
Well, I got a pair of gloves when I was 2 years old. So my fascination for the sport started when I was 2. Remember my parents screaming at the television set when I was a kid growing up, when I was a baby actually, with Harry Kutsia fighting overseas, and obviously there was a time zone difference, so brought up to that, and then kind of wanted to know what was going on, and then just started being fascinated with 2 gloves, putting them on my hands, and then waking up like after midnight and seeing my late father come home wearing a Sanyo tracksuit with white pants and white leather shoes, and me asking him, "Daddy, where were you?" And he'd say, "Colin, I was at the boxing." And I'd say, I want to go. And he'd say to me, "Colin, you're still too young." So I nagged, and I was taken to a boxing gym at the age of 7. And that was in 1985, and I literally fell in love with the sport. So, and I haven't looked back. Then I've turned it into my passion, my hobby, my career, my job, and now my life. So yeah, you could say I'm well versed with the sport. So I think what's important to note is that I never fought competitively, but I started learning how to box at the age of 7, and I obviously started sparring a couple of months after that. And I just love the ethos of the gym. I mean, you got to remember in 1985, South Africa was during the height of apartheid. And even as a young kid growing up, you knew that there was political tension. You could see that there was segregation. And walking into a boxing gym, and that's why one of the reasons why I fell in love with the sport was there were black, white, colored in. It didn't make a difference what your color was or what your bank balance was. You were judged on your skill, not on your background, on what where you come from. And that to me drove me to the place where I felt just so comfortable. And it's just a very honest, brutal sport. And I say brutal with respect because it is a brutal sport, but just that moment of seeing the integration amongst everyone kind of drove me to a point where like, this is my place. This is where I want to be. Even at the age of 7, like I fell in love with it, and I'm still in love with it. I think probably the latest victory in Japan about 5 weeks ago is probably the one that stands out for me, with Pumelelo the Truth Kafu, an 8-1 underdog, fighting esteemed 4 division world champion Kosei Tanaka for the WBO Super Flyweight Championship of the world. No one gave us a hope in hell of winning that fight. And we got in and we produced the goods. And it was a split decision with Jimmy Lennon Jr. saying, and that was definitely not just one of the highlights of my boxing career, but probably in my life. There have been several others. Sivanato Nonshinga winning the championship twice in Mexico, regaining it this year against Adrian Carrell when we got knocked out in 2 rounds in Monte Carlo last year. And then, of course, Heki Butler, my signature fighter, who really gave me a chance, who took a gamble with me because I was so my boxing knowledge and my history of the sport was very good. But my track record as a trainer, as a manager at the time, was really unproven. And Heki took a gamble with me, took a chance on me. And that's why he's my signature fighter, because we joined our relationship in boxing together in the professional ranks, and we grew together, and he became a linear world champion and a two-weight credible world champion in both the 105-pound and 108-pound division, and arguably one of the greatest African fighters in boxing history. Potentially now there's talks of, is he the greatest South African fighter in history? So there have been several moments, and obviously highlights and lowlights, but the highlights are definitely outweigh the lowlights. I mean, it's life. Boxing is very parallel to life. So when you lose, it sucks. It's fucking awful, to be honest with you. But when you win, that's an incredible high. And being in sports, and I think this is important to know. I was speaking to someone yesterday whose daughter wants to become a sports doctor. And my response to the parent was, when you're in sports, you got to work for one thing and one thing only, and that's to win. So I come into my office, I consult, and I work by my laptop for one purpose only, and that's to win. I go on my floor to coach fighters when they're getting ready for fights for one thing and one thing only, and that's to win. When I promote with my company, Boxing 5, my company, No Doubt Management, in association with Boxing 5, we work for one thing and one thing only, is for us to win. And I think being in sports, you have to have that mindset of wanting to and willing to give everything to win. It's a very good question. I saw Hecky in 2006 at an amateur boxing dine event in the South. And I'd read about the kid, and, I was the youngest fighter still to this day to ever win a senior title at the age of 17 in the amateurs. And I walked up to him, just, I suppose I showed a bit of chutzpah. And I said, "Hi, I'm Colin Nathan. I'd love for you to come to my gym at some point, just to move around." And we struck a friendship up. And when he was in the national team in Pretoria, I took time out of my day and I went to go and spend some time with him at the national team when they were preparing there to fight overseas, and obviously for the national team to represent South Africa. So I think we started as friends, and he gave me a chance because I literally approached him and I said, "Look, this is who I am, and come hang out." And then Layla Ali was preparing to fight in South Africa, and she trained exclusively at the hot box gym. And I invited Hecky and his dad to come, meet her and come train alongside her. And that's pretty much our game. So it kind of fell into place where I put a smile on my face, Kevin, reached up my hand, said, "Hello, this is who I am, and I'd love for you to come to my gym and move around." And I think that's where it all started. So success is built on relationships. And I think that's why our relationship was so successful, because of us being so close, and him obviously just appreciating the fact that I reached out to him and said, "Look, this is who I am, come through." It's a great question. And obviously, if you've seen socials, you've seen the clips of me in the corner giving those, motivational, uplifting speeches to my athletes. It's very easy to be a good cornerman. So you can be a good trainer and you can be a good manager, but you can be an awful cornerman. Sometimes you need to be the best at all three, and you got to work on all three games. And it's very easy being a good cornerman when your fight is winning, but it's incredibly difficult to be a good cornerman when your fight is losing, or it's a very balanced fight. I spend a lot of time with my fighters. I enjoy being in interviews with them. I enjoy sitting with them and discussing what they want out of their lives, the dreams and the aspirations. And more recently, I suppose, when we looked at the 9-minute speech with Sivanati when he fought in Hermosillo against Hector Flores after 9 rounds, I really genuinely thought we were behind. I thought the fight was balanced, but I thought we were slightly behind. And I looked at him and I said, and it's not like I prepare these things, or it's not like it's very ad lib, and it comes from the moment of a place of, "Listen, I really want you to perform and do well. And I'm putting my heart and soul into this, and I need you to as well." And I looked at him and I said, "Look, you got 9 minutes left, 3 rounds left, 9 minutes to turn your life around." And when I said you have 9 minutes to turn your life around, I meant it, because he would have been just another step going in, a title challenger coming up short, or he would have shifted gears, put the pressure on, and changed his life. And that's exactly what happened. More recently now in Japan, spending time with Phumelela Kafu, the second South African currently to hold a credible world championship next to Kevin Arena, he knocked the champion down in the 5th round. We were well on our way. And then the 7th round, he went into a shell. And being in studio with him, when one of the hosts of a radio station asked him, "What other dreams and goals do you have?" He said, "Well, I always dreamed of buying my mother a house." And at the end of the 7th round, I was thinking, okay, now the chips are down. He's got the ability and the opportunity literally to change his life, but he's not taking advantage of it. What do I say to spot that emotion, to galvanize him physically and mentally to push out? And when I said to him at the end of the 7th round, "You're showing him too much respect," all that stuff about buying your mother a house, you're letting this guy take it away from you, he came out galvanized. So it's about knowing your athletes. It's also about knowing personality types. It's about knowing what buttons to push. It's also knowing how to get the best of your athlete. And I think that's one of my gifts in terms of boxing, is that I know how to get the best out of my athletes. Look, I think it's in a good space. I think there's pros and cons to the Paul and Tyson fight, if you want to call it that. I rather call it more an event. I have not watched it. I refuse to watch it. I want to remember Mike Tyson in his prime knocking out Michael Spinks in one round in 1988. You also need to understand is that things evolve and things change. You know, when Tyson was top of his game, we had no social media. We had no YouTubers. We had no guys who could go on Instagram and make a clown of themselves or give out some information that the youth would be interested in. The reality is that times have changed. The young generation want instant gratification. They look up to a guy like Jake Paul. The thing is that, so for me as a purist, I mean, I refuse to watch it. But equally, having said that, the youth are drawn to a guy like Jake Paul, who's become a mega superstar, because of the fact that he connects with the audience of a certain age bracket. And people want instant gratification. And when it comes to content, social media content, Paul's one of those guys who kind of jumped on the bandwagon first and really blew up. And there was a ton of money that was made when they had that event with both parties. People were banking on the name of Tyson, and I think equally so was Mike Tyson himself, who earned a lot of money, apparently reported to be $20 million. And if you saw the socials leading up to that, they had clips of Tyson of old. But the reality is, you and I both know, is that our athletes and our heroes get old and they can't perform the way they used to. Jake Paul knew that, and he was banking on his image, his reputation, and his name, and against a brand that will never be forgotten in boxing history, being the force of Mike Tyson. The state of itself is in a good state. There are other sanctioning bodies. The true boxing fans get obviously fed up with some of the decisions and the title challenges and the title matches that are made. But equally, if you go back in history, there were title challenges in the 70s and 80s by the WBA that you kind of looked up, and I've just finished reading the Roberto Duran book now, and some of those WBA challenges in the 70s and 80s were equally probably worse than what they are today. So it's like you can never please everyone, but you'll always get those superstars coming through, like Monster Inoue, the junior featherweight from Japan, who's arguably one of the top three fighters pound for pound. You've got Alexander Usyk, who is a 2-division world champion, who looks set to have the rematch in a month's time against Tyson Fury, who he beats on a split decision the first time. And then you've got guys like Canelo, who just capture the American and the Mexican audience. And then because of his fists, he's captured the audience globally. Then, of course, if you go back, you've got Floyd Mayweather, who really did change the game. And then you've got Manny Pacquiao. So through each generation, you're always going to find fighters that actually uplift the sport, get the fans more engaged. And you're always going to have those guys saying, oh, well, boxing's not the same like it was in the 70s or the 80s. Well, or, you know, Muhammad Ali would have beaten Mike Tyson. Well, we don't know that. We don't know that. So to your question, yes, I think it's in a good state. But we also need to remember that we need to appreciate and honor our fighters for this current generation and appreciate the current fighters of yesterday's generation. And that's very important to note. Boxing went through some really crazy decisions and moments, particularly last year. The current board, the old outgoing board from last year was an absolute joke. The acting CEO was also a joke. I mean, they were making decisions, suspending this one, that one. I'm surprised I never got suspended because I was very outspoken and very vocal about the current state at the time of South African boxing. We now have the GNU, Government of National Unity, and I think there's a lot of change politically in South Africa currently. I think it's a very exciting time to be living in South Africa at the moment. And also, we now have a sports minister who is competent, charismatic, and making good decisions, Mr. Gates McKenzie, who I'm a big fan of. He's actually been to my offices and he's met some of my top athletes and he's engaging. And I think that change is going to take a bit of time. But I think right now there's a good feeling amongst South African fighters. Pumela Gafu winning the world championship, Kevin Arena being the Bridgerweight world champion. We've got a host of world title contenders, legitimate world title contenders. We have the talent to go overseas, perform, get these big opportunities, not just get the big opportunities, but cross the line and win. And I think Africa as well, you're going to see a lot more of a surge with a lot of these African territories producing a lot more boxing events with a lot more talent creeping up. And you think to yourself as a boxing fan, where did he come from? Where's he been? And I think a problem, one of the challenges is for these African territories, a lot of them don't have the professional structures. And I think that's going to be changing. I think people globally are now starting to realize that Africa is actually a hub for unearthed talents, raw diamonds that need to be polished. And I think I'm very upbeat, not only for South African boxing, but for African boxing. No Doubt Management is actually my nickname in boxing. My nickname's Colin Nathan, was given to me by Kwenamarara Mabela. And that's because in studio many years ago, I answered him a question in Zulu saying Nomaganjani, that the fight's going to end in one round, and it did. And since then, since 2007, it's stuck by. I'm going to be hosting a show called No Punches Pulled by Colin Nathan. We're going to be discussing a host of things within the sport, locally, internationally, and obviously controversial stuff as well, which I think is very important. You know, you can't brush certain things under the carpet. I'm going to try and be as neutral as possible, even though I am opinion-based. I do have a very big opinion, and I think that's one of the reasons why I want to host the show. So No Punches Pulled is going to be talking about fighters, promoters, managers, trainers, cornermen, and we're going to be discussing the nitty-gritty and the controversial things about boxing, fights, fighters, putting fights together. So it's going to be very engaging, and I would love the community and you guys to tune in once a week to listen to my show called No Punches Pulled.
Welcome to Omni Sport, the ultimate African sports audio channel. Live and on demand at omniaudio.africa and streaming data free on the MTN network in South Africa. It's where Africa comes to play.